Evening, everyone. I'm just doing the old faffing behind the scenes. Just bear with me. Um, cool. Stick that in there. Tick this box here. Right then. Yeah, cool. And mute this before it says anything. Oh, I'm going to get there in time. Mute. That'll do. Right, cool. Yeah. And just see that in the chat. Right, cool. Yeah, all good to go, guys. Thanks for bearing with me. Welcome this week. If you haven't been to or haven't seen a live stream before, the way we do it is we just go through a bunch of questions that have come through the week, as well as answer questions that have come in the live stream itself. Few rules with it, so it's not legal advice. We're trying our best, but obviously we're flawed, and also sometimes the questions won't always kind of enable us to get a full understanding of the case. So we're trying our best. We'll try and refer to different bits and pieces, but different cases and stuff where we can. But you need to treat it with a pinch of salt. And what else? Oh yeah, no personal data in the chat, please. So I'll prioritize questions that are coming through the comment section of the YouTube channel according to whether they're anonymized or not. So I will do the unanonymized ones. But questions in the chat, if you just basically just ask a what if question, so rather than saying I've been in B&B for 10 weeks, just say what if someone's in B&B for 10 weeks. It just means you don't have to put your personal stuff on the internet. It's just good practice in general, and it also helps you isolate what the issue is from a legal point of view, because there's legal issues that we might be able to give a bit of help with, and there's some other issues, that all the kind of stress that comes with it we can't do anything about at all. So yeah, and if you're a regular, it'd be nice to say yeah, see you's around, so say hello in the chat. It'd be good. Last week I had a really quiet week. I don't know if it's something I said, but yeah, it'd be good to see if we've got any regulars in. So let's go to, oh yeah, I guess the usual sort of YouTube stuff. If you want to like and share it, please do. Subscribe if you haven't, you get the notifications. I've got some videos in the pipeline. I said that last week and the week before, but there are actually some more coming out at some point. So yeah, right, let me get the virtual flip chart up. And we'll start with a couple of questions that have been anonymized to start with them, and then we'll see what comes in the live stream. So everyone can see that. Shannon, can you see that? Yeah, cool. Right, so let me zoom in a little bit. So what if someone is in a council house with his wife, both on the tenancy, but they split up? The bloke suffers from bad mental health and self-harm, and it's making him worse in the house, or living in the house. Where would he stand with the council? He could get, he could get letters from doctors supporting this. Would it be priority? And would he be only entitled to a one-bed accommodation, as he'd have the kids half the time? If he was just to leave the house because of his mental health and was to stop somewhere else for the meantime, would that make him intentionally homeless? So really good question. Well, actually, there's several questions here that we could probably talk quite a lot about, actually. Hey, right, B. Smith. So let's start with, yeah, there's some good news in this and there's some bad news. The bad news is that even if you can kind of make the right argument here, it's actually going to still require some pretty specific evidence from the medical professional supporting you. So if there's an old case called Moncada or Monsada from like 98. It's a really outdated case. I wouldn't be surprised if something around this changes soon, because it essentially kind of is a recipe for domestic abuse, even if there's not domestic abuse yet. It's the sort of situation where it's just going to put pressure on a relationship in a really kind of dysfunctional way. So if there is no domestic abuse involved and you are joint tenants, and essentially you tried to make a homeless application, you did make a homeless application, and you said, I've split up from my wife and I can't live there anymore, can you help me out with housing? They would immediately say you're not homeless. And the Moncada case was really ridiculous one, which is partly why I say it's about time that he got sorted out in the courts. But essentially, in that case, there was a guy and his wife. He went to prison. Whilst in prison, his wife got into a relationship with another guy. This new guy moved into their home, and when he came out of prison, he was saying to the council, "Look, I can't live there because my ex-partner's now living with her new partner." And the judge said, "Yeah, you can." And it was ridiculous, but that was, as I say, that was 1998. That's what the ruling was. And so, if there is no domestic abuse involved, then the default answer is going to be that you're not homeless. However, there are some things you can bring in here. They're just quite difficult to. So, as we always say, if you can get a solicitor, this is definitely a case where you want to do so, because one of the arguments you can advance is that although you have a legal right to occupy this property, and let's assume that there is no domestic abuse, you can still argue that it's not reasonable to continue to occupy the accommodation because of the impact it's having on your mental health, which is a legitimate argument to make, but you need to have very, very, very strong evidence, because in effect, what you need to demonstrate is that, and let me just draw another bit of case law to give some background. There's another case called Lomax v. Gosport, which is 2018. And in that case, effectively, long story short, this lady was very well physically unwell, but she was also becoming very mentally unwell because of the social isolation from her family. And so she made an application to Gosport. They said, you're not homeless, but he went to the Court of Appeal. And the argument was that because she had a disability in the form of a depression, and because the social isolation of living in the middle of nowhere and not being able to mobilize was making that depression get significantly worse, she was essentially legally homeless. Now there are some steps I've missed out there, but that's the upshot of that case. So you could make an application based on the impact this current living situation is having on your mental health, but essentially you need very, very clear cut evidence. It's going to be quite difficult to get that ordinarily from a GP anyway, but a psychiatrist would be far better. I mean, in that Lomax case, it was a GP that gave the evidence, but as we've kind of talked about in previous weeks, GPs seem more and more reluctant to actually give any useful information at all. They sort of resent it. So that there is an argument to be made there, effectively that this living environment is kind of causing your mental health to significantly worsen. And also potentially the risk of self-harm is also going to worsen. So there is an argument to be made. Before I go to the second half of the question, Karis or Shannon, do you want to add anything into that or take anything away from that? No, okay, cool. So I'll keep going for a bit further. So, say, and it's probably worth mentioning domestic abuse, because I think a situation like this, as I say, I would describe it as a recipe for domestic abuse to take place. And effectively, domestic abuse legally it's not very well defined, but in effect, it's where one person's deliberate behaviour is causing harm of some kind to the other person. So there's there's no way around it. It's a very complicated situation, very complicated definition, but that's really what you're talking about. So if remaining in property is probably going to leave you at risk of further domestic abuse, then you are legally homeless. So if that was the case, it was actually quite straightforward legally, although you do have to still tackle the council's housing options team to try and get them to accept that. But that's kind of how it would work. So we've probably said many times before, it doesn't matter what type of abuse it is. It could be physical, it could be psychological, could be financial, could be coercion, control, could be any of those things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be particularly severe. It just needs to be likely to continue. It needs to be abuse, so it needs to hit that definition of domestic abuse, and then it needs to be at risk of continuing. That's when you're then at that kind of cusp, at that point of being legally homeless, even though you have a right to live there. Shannon and Karis, you're both unmuted, so do you want to chip in at this point?
I was just going to throw in a really small thing around the domestic abuse there, which I think we probably all think is obvious, but even if you're separated, it would still count as domestic abuse. So and I know that seems really weird and we're probably quite used to that, but I think for a lot of people, and I could see a housing options officer saying, well, you're not together, so it's not domestic abuse. But actually, because you've had a partnership like that, it would count under the definition of domestic abuse. But yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Shannon. And Karis, you got anything to add to this one?
Yeah, I was going to go on the line of even if there's no domestic abuse, they can talk to the local authority or a landlord, housing association, and their ex, and get them to, if they're going to mutually and consent, the landlord can consent to taking off the tenancy, and if they can't just take you off the tenancy, but because they're both responsible for the rent and any arrears and things like that. But it's about talking to you and trying to work together and moving on in this, but they will help you in terms of helping move out and maybe get the tenancy in just the one person's name, and then you can talk to the council about him, and I would look at the council's policy, because it'll be on their website. They might even have a policy in place for it. If you move out and you're breaking up from your partner, so I was going to say and the landlord may give you permission to assign the tenancy, which is without the domestic abuse element. So there is kind of that, if you can talk to your ex-partner and you're going to work together, that could still be possible.
Yeah, you'd run the risk there of being. I mean, kind of this links then into kind of the second part of, well, that third part of question, and I guess also some kind of. I think we need to finish off by actually kind of giving some practical stuff, because there might still be some options with this, but effectively, if you cannot show the council that it's unreasonable to continue to remain there, and you then take your name off the tenancy, or kind of as Cara says, kind of get that consent to be removed from the tenancy, then you would be at high risk of being found intentionally homeless. Now, you might still need to do that in order to access the other options, because there's a number of other moving parts here. So if I just try and tackle these a little bit. So first things first, having the kids half the time is, although it legally can actually ascribe priority to both parents, the councils have the ability, the power not to, basically to ignore that. So you can almost guarantee they will do. So there's like another case that's probably worth checking out called Holmes, Holmes, Morehouse. So that was kind of where that sort of case, that sort of idea was kind of set out. So, and although councils should not just simply look at who gets the child benefit, it's more than that. In reality, where you've got a mum with the kids who has accommodation big enough for the kids, and a dad who hasn't, then you just know what the council's going to do, and they are entitled to say that the dad hasn't, the dad doesn't, only needs a 1-bed property, and that also means that the dad would not automatically be in priority need. However, going back to the bad mental health and self-harm, that would potentially be a source of priority needs. Again, we're not going to go into full detail here, but there's videos on the channel which kind of explains what that threshold is. So yeah, okay. So in terms of that, that's kind of an overview of the law, I guess. In terms of what someone should do in this situation, make a homeless application, and essentially hope as much as you can that you're going to get a decent housing officer, because although unless one of those things we've kind of said is it applies, the council doesn't have to help you. Some councils are really nice, some council officers are really nice, basically, and so some council officers will kind of see the situation and say, okay, we're going to try and help. Now, there's a couple of things that will be open to them. One is that they would help you into help you into private rented accommodation. I guess what I want to say at this point is, before you kind of make that decision to try and take your name off the tenancy, you need to kind of get the council's blessing for that, because otherwise, as I say, it's just you're just a recipe for being found intentionally homeless and not having a very helpful council. So there are some other things that could kind of kick in it. I'm going to try and keep it simple. But so and another thing, and bottom line is, I guess you would have to say you need to consider supported accommodation, which is far from ideal. We get that. But it might actually be in the situation the quickest way to get social housing. So what you'd effectively want to do again is, through the conversation you have with the housing officer, to explore what types of support accommodation are there locally, and how long you need to live in them before you get back onto the housing register. So, because some support accommodation is actually quite a quick rehousing kind of route, and other councils, you can just basically get left in support accommodation for years. The other thing I'd say at this point is that it really does depend on what council you're dealing with, because I had a conversation. I talked to you about this. I'm doing like an FOI to every council to get the average waiting time, so kind of be able to put it all together. I spoke to Bassett Law the other day, which is in, I think, Nottinghamshire, and they were literally like, the average waiting time is 6 days, and that is because we move people into TA, we've got our own stock, and we'll convert that into a tenancy, and essentially, as long as it all goes smoothly. So that's is kind of, that's unusual, but it's not that unusual. I think it's very unusual in London or anywhere near London, but it might be that you might be near it. We don't know what area that we're talking about here, so it might be an area where there is actually a much quicker route to getting rehoused properly. So it's all rather doom and gloom. I think, as I say, in reality, you want to make a homeless application. You want to get the council to give you the advice. If they're going to accept that they're going to help you out and they're going to advise you to get your name off the tenancy, then great. But I would not suggest pursuing that unless you can get the council's effectively their blessing on it. And the two ways you would do that is either where there might be domestic abuse. We're not sure that there is here, but there's certainly, potentially there's certainly a risk of domestic abuse. Or if you can, even without domestic abuse, you can show that it's not reasonable to continue to occupy there because of the impact it's having on your mental health and risk of self-harm. So I mean, and I say risk of self-harm actually, again, it's maybe probably worth maybe focusing on that when you're getting medical evidence to say to the doc, or the psychiatrist or whatever, can you also specifically state what you think the risk of self-harm would happen if I remained here? Because they might then say, actually, I've got really big concerns about this person's mental health and risk of self-harm getting much worse. And that potentially would be another avenue of having that argument with them. Shannon?
Yeah, just so on the letter point as well, if you're asking the GP that, it's worth reassuring them that if they put that you're at high risk of self-harm or whatever in the letter, that's an action, that's them doing something about your situation. Because I've definitely had GPs where they're like, oh, I can't write that down because then I have to do something about it. No, that is you doing something about it. And the other point I was going to make is, again, it would depend on your local area and if this is housing association or private, but some housing associations have workers who sort of deal with this sort of stuff, because often relationship breakdowns then turn into rent arrears, it then turns into sort of disrepair of the property. So your housing association might be really helpful in this situation. There's often managed moves for families, but they might be able to move you internally through their own sort of registers. So it's worth talking to them and saying, look, particularly if you've had a good track record with your housing association and you've always paid rent and you've been a good tenant and you've got, say, a regular income, whether that's benefits or employment, and you can sort of prove, I guess, that you're a good tenant. It's definitely worth an avenue exploring, because again, you're not committed either. You can sort of ask the questions and have those conversations and just open up your options a bit wider.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Shannon. So I think I appreciate what we've just covered there is very complicated. And there's a lot of different kind of things all working. And again, kind of say the usual kind of glib thing of saying try and get a solicitor. And I think going into a council with a solicitor, I guess as well, there's absolutely no harm at all in engaging with counsellor as well, as in the elected counsellor, not a sort of mental health counsellor, and just kind of again just trying to give them some elicit some sympathy basically.
Sorry,
So we'll move on. Oh yeah, go on,
yeah,
Karis. Yeah, sorry.
just on the last bit where it says if you just leave, please don't just leave, because that'll be like you're just intentionally homeless because you've just left. I know you, even if unless it gets really bad and there's a concern for your safety, don't just leave.
Yeah, and then I mean, it's interesting. So I guess just another little bit of law that's just kind of good to explain is that the definition of one of the arms of the definition of homelessness, as in you're homeless if you have accommodation that's not reasonable to continue to occupy, is exactly the same definition that is used with intentional homelessness. So effectively, you cannot be found intentionally homeless from accommodation which is unreasonable to continue to occupy. So essentially, what you want to do is get the council to accept that that's the case before you look to leave or end that tenancy. So just how you at Cheeseface? Yeah, I've got to say actually. So Will's not here tonight. I'm not sure what he's doing. I don't think it's anything fun, but he's going to be back next week, and I assume he's going to be doing his stream on Monday as well. So how you at Shadownet? You're right. Just we Malachi. Cheeseface has made the point that the council may ask for a crime reference number with dealing with domestic abuse. Councils are at liberty to ask the question, but they cannot in any way say that because there is no crime reference number that there's no such, there's no domestic abuse. I would say, without having the stats to hand, that most people who are subject to domestic abuse will not go to the police anyway, so the police won't know. Seeing some questions in chat, we're going to continue going. I think there's one more question in the week that's anonymous. Just to answer the question, it's just really quickly answered. So someone just asked, what's the average waiting time for a 4-bed property in Horsham, please? So according to the data I've got, once the main housing duty has been accepted, which should really only take 2 months, the average waiting time for a 4-bed is 92 days. So that's pretty good. We don't know how many kind of cases that's based on. It might be based on one case, so it might be an outlier. The rest of that's the shortest waiting time in Horsham actually for a 4-bed rather than a 1-bed. But yeah, so that's just kind of again, I'm going to do a proper good job on that when I get the final responses back. I'm waiting for about another 20 or so out of 300. Let's get the next question, which is also talking about domestic abuse actually. It's quite an interesting one. I think the answer is no, but let's have a go. So, hypothetical question in regards to domestic abuse: if a neighbour was screaming abuse so loud in their own home, both day and night, and wakes the children in neighbouring property, who gets very scared, are those children victims of domestic abuse too? Now, this is an interesting question. As I say, the answer is no, but there is some interesting bits to this. So, one of the things the Domestic Abuse Act changed about the definition of domestic abuse is that you are a victim of domestic abuse if you are a child witnessing domestic abuse, but the inference is it's in your own family. So it'd be kind of, let's say your kids, watching your parents, one of your parents being abused by the other, then the child themselves would be a victim of domestic abuse, which is interesting because up until the DA Act came in a few years ago, under 16-year-olds were not able to be victims of domestic abuse. Effectively, they'd be a victim of child abuse. That'd be how they were classified. And I'm not actually quite. There's obviously some thought behind it, but it's interesting. I guess one of the thoughts I've got about this is that often we see domestic abuse as a gendered crime, and it absolutely is in terms of the majority of victims are women, and certainly the vast majority of kind of victims of homicide are women at the hands of men. But when it comes to children witnessing domestic abuse, you'd have to assume that there's 50-50 because boys are just as much a risk of being of seeing domestic abuse as girls. So there's an interesting bit there. The reason I say the answer is no, and I'm 99% sure on this, is that the domestic abuse has to kind of be from an associated person. So because you're talking here about a neighbourhood issue rather than assuming that the neighbours are strangers, then I just don't think it kicks in. However, that does not mean to say that it's not an antisocial behaviour issue, and it does still open the possibility up of making an argument that it's not reasonable to continue to occupy. I would say again, you're going to need to have some incredibly clear evidence from some professionals here, schools, CAMH, that sort of thing, to kind of make the argument. So in one sense, I don't think a homeless application is going to help someone out here, but I do think informing the council and making sure the council's aware of it. Would I recommend calling the police if you've got a domestic abuse situation happening next door? I guess my answer would probably be yes, but it may well put you at risk, yourself, because that the perpetrator might be a proper nasty bit of work and basically come and target you as well. So you have to kind of just weigh that up, I guess. Shannon, you got anything on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to add, and this isn't advice from me, but advice I've been told. The Noise app is what a lot of local authorities and housing associations use. So it's probably worth downloading that, and it will record like proper information about the noise and the time, the location, and everything else. If I'm completely honest, I haven't found it an easy app to use. But that might be me being older technology. And it is something that they sort of seem to require, like a noise log and diary and all of that. So it's probably worth doing that if you are sort of going down that route.
Yeah. Because I think that's ASB kind of seems that'll be their bread and butter. Keep a log, keep a diary of what's going on when, and as Shannon says, use an app. I assume that's replaced because they used to kind of give you like noise recording equipment to put in your house, but I don't think they do it anymore.
No.
I didn't have a thought about this actually. What was it? I've now forgotten it. Oh yeah, that was it. It's entirely possible that this house, the neighbouring household, is actually already known to both the landlord if it's social housing and also the police and potentially the MARIC, which is the multi-agency risk assessment conference, which is like the kind of key partners that kind of discuss cases as on a regular basis. So it may well be that if you report it to the council, you're not the first one to tell them, and they may well be they may be well aware of it, and actually telling the council may have an impact on whether whether the perpetrator is removed, whether there's kind of action taken or whatever. But yeah, difficult situation. I'm in no way kind of have much experience in the antisocial behaviour kind of field, but there certainly are quite a few powers that councils can use.
Do you, in this situation, like say just screaming abuse, and like we don't know if it's screaming, we don't know what context that screaming abuse is in, but say it was domestic abuse, and it's not on any individual. It's not on any individual to make a safeguarding alert. That's not what I'm saying. But do you think it is something that would help in this situation if they were, say it was domestic abuse and this neighbour was to anonymously make a safeguarding claim on their neighbour saying, look, my neighbour's experiencing domestic abuse, I wonder if that would be helpful. And again, I'm not trying to put any pressure on someone to make a safeguarding alert because you're an individual, you're a member of the public. But I could see that being useful because then the safeguarding teams involved, and even though they might not take action, they might again, we don't know who else has reported what, and it builds that bigger picture.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, I mean, yeah, answering for myself. So I was on a job where I was painting the soffit boards of a house. So that up on scaffolding outside and over the neighbour's garden, there was just an absolute carnage going on. This guy was being outrageous. So I rang the police, and actually it turned out there was a flag on their property. So the police came within like a few minutes and basically removed him. And so that was clearly an example where the police were already well aware there was kind of these markers put on the property, like in Bedford they call it a SIG marker. I don't know if that's like a national thing, but yeah, they'll basically it kind of had. I have no idea what long-term impact it had, but obviously in that situation I had nothing to lose because they're not going to come smash my house in because they don't know where I live. Whereas if you're the neighbour and you're potentially the only one hearing it, and I think just to mention this as well, this is probably going to really scare people. I have seen them in antisocial behaviour type cases where a neighbour will make a report about something, and then they will be named in the court eviction process. So, I'm working on a social housing. It's like an older people's kind of like sheltered accommodation, and one particular tenant was causing a lot of issues, and was then they was evicted for it. But in the eviction paperwork, it basically named all the neighbours. So this is not doesn't fill you with confidence, but I guess it's just good to make an informed decision about it. Personally, I would, but it's easy for me to say
With
that from from YouTube. So yeah, Shannon.
with safe with safeguarding alerts as well, it's so backwards because even if you do an anonymous safeguarding alert, they'll often read out the exact information you've put in the alert to the person that you've been alerting about, so they can work out who you are because of the information you know. So if you were doing that, you'd have to almost make it so weak and watered down and do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like less specific, so they
yeah,
didn't know who it was, and it's just yeah.
yeah. Because if you say, yeah, they were stamping on the floor, well, okay, that must be the downstairs neighbour then. So it's yeah, it's yeah, I think it's very easy to say that members of the public should intervene, but it's a different world if you're actually in that situation. And ultimately, it's likely that a perpetrator is not going to be removed anytime soon. It's going to, even if the council does act, it's going to take months to actually get them out. Yeah, so it's so quite depressing so far. Another depressing question here. So this is the last one I think of the anonymised ones that are coming through the week. So can a county court bailiff force entry for a Section 21 possession order if the tenant doesn't open the door? If not, can a High Court enforcement officer force entry? I believe the answer is yes, but I don't actually know the technicalities of it. So, and I don't actually know what that looks like in practice, whether they literally batter down the door or what. But yeah, they have the power to gain entry and forcibly evict you. But yeah, I don't have direct experience of this, so I don't want to kind of say too much. But yeah, I think the answer is yes. Unless Shannon or Karis want to say I'm wrong.
Do you want me, Sally?
Yeah, yeah, cool.
So it does depend on the warrant, and yes, they can, but they must have a court order in place, and it cannot be used like arbitrarily. So it has perimeters, and it's got to be peacefully to gain. If they don't open the door, they would usually leave and reschedule, but they would take additional steps. And they're known as High Court bailiffs to but this will be once the possession order's been in place and it's transferred to High Court and it's relevant to this eviction. Yeah, they will, but it's a last resort and it has to be done lawfully. So there is a process they've got to go through. But yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking they just won't answer the door, like a regular bailiff, if they're coming around for a monetary claim, no, this is to evict you. But and they might call the police and things like that. But they're subject to conditions and it has to be done peacefully and lawfully. Whether it is actually done, don't know.
I mean, there's I never watched him, but there's certainly TV shows like kind of like a day in the life of a bailiff, and yeah, not the nicest characters you ever find to kind of in those roles, but yeah, cool, okay, yeah, that will hopefully, yeah. I mean, bottom line is, yeah, I think they have to give 48 hours notice as well, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah.
So let's get into the
And you'll
live
be,
stream. Oh,
sorry, should
sorry,
I just
Karen.
say, yeah, you'll be charged. So this will go
Right,
on, like your legal fees.
yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get onto the live stream questions. So what if homeless officer says they're looking for emergency accommodation for someone, but prolonging it because they're looking for private? Should that person push for emergency for supported housing route? What's that? Could that person just say what SH stands for? I'm not quite sure what that means in that context. I mean, just to kind of give us some answers to this. If I mean, okay, so the actual legal threshold for providing emergency accommodation, which is technically known as interim accommodation, is really clear cut. If there is reasons to believe that you might be homeless, might be eligible, might have a priority needs, then the council has to secure that accommodation is available for you. So, if those three criteria apply, then there is no lawful basis for the council to delay it unless you're happy with them delaying it, which doesn't sound like it's the case here. So, council could say, are you happy staying put for a month? Whilst you can still stay there because we can get you a private rented accommodation property within a month, and you won't have to move into temporary accommodation. You won't have to worry about it. They can probably negotiate with the landlord to try and make that a bit smoother. So that so that's kind of they could do it. But if you're saying I need I'm homeless, I need help, and those three criteria are satisfied, then the council cannot legitimately not provide temporary accommodation, interim accommodation. Shannon?
I was just gonna say, I think SH, yeah, they've just popped it in social housing.
Oh, social.
But
Oh,
it
sorry. Yeah.
looks
Okay.
it
Yeah.
looks like I've just read out the comment now. That is what I thought.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Okay. So there even if you even yeah. So I guess it's just worth saying some count. I mean, there is no way to guarantee getting social housing, and some councils essentially won't give social housing out at all. So again, going back to those average waiting times, you look at somewhere like Camden, the average waiting time might be like 3 years for a single person, but there's only one person in that whole of that period that was given support, social housing. Everyone else got private rented accommodation. So if you're in London, for sure, I would say there's a very high probability that you'll end up in private rented anyway, even if you go through the emergency accommodation route anyway. So effectively, it might actually be practically make sense because if the best you're going to get is going to be a private rented sector tenancy anyway, and by staying in your current property, let's say a Section 21 is in process but it kind of hasn't got to the final stages yet, then it could actually be in your interest on paper to follow that, kind of essentially just accept the offer of private rented accommodation. Shannon?
just to make the point as well, like private rented accommodation, they can't discharge their duty into private rented accommodation if it's unaffordable. And I think a lot of people, obviously, the main concern, and I don't want to talk for people, but we hear it week and week, don't we? But the main concern about private rented is it's so expensive, but the council can't do that if it's unaffordable for you. Um, and so then when you take that out of the equation and you sort of compare private rented and social, often the quality in private sometimes is better. But in regards to like tenancy lengths, a lot of social housing providers don't do like lifelong tenancies anymore. So it's probably going to be a 12-month tenancy anyway. Um, so in terms of stability, it's not necessarily more or less stable than social housing. But if it's the affordability element, hopefully that reassures people that, yeah, the council can't discharge you into unaffordable accommodation because you would still be legally homeless.
Yeah. And the kind of things about suitability would apply as well. And I mean, I'll give you a very brief whistle stop tour of how this works. I did a video about this, which is one of the best performing videos on the channel, actually. Not that says a lot, but will I get social housing or private rented accommodation? I think that's the title of it. And I kind of go through in detail because there's actually a whole range of permutations of how this all works. Because technically speaking, I guess, if, by holding out for the council to make the homelessness decision, then you might get a better quality of private rented accommodation. For example, it might need to be a 12-month tenancy rather than a 6-month tenancy. However, they can legitimately and totally discharge their duty, as in end their duty in the relief period stage, if they provide a, it's called a final accommodation offer, so that only has to be a 6-month tenancy, and I think that's ultimately what London. It sounds like London are doing all the time. I mean, yeah, my experience is mostly outside of London, but that's I think, yeah. So there's kind of essentially no I know it kind of, there's still a lot of information around saying, you can hold out for social housing. You can't. There's no way to guarantee it. Even if the council did follow the law and do everything right, and you challenged everything they didn't do right and everything, you still can get private rented accommodation. Um, I think we said it before as well. One of the major contributing factors that might change that is whether you've got disability, like a physical disability, because it's much more difficult to secure private rented accommodation where there's aids and adaptations that have been made. So in that case, social housing is going to be more practical for the council to discharge their duty. But for everyone else, it's much more likely to be private rented in some areas. But as I say, Bassett Law is an example. If you've got a local connection to Bassett Law, you might want to approach there because there's much shorter waiting time and much higher probability of getting social housing. So next question, which is on the borderline of being anonymised, but we'll take it. So family members' disabilities are not considered during the Section 202 review. They couldn't challenge the council decision to the court. They're now facing eviction. What are their options? Okay, so Karis might well help me out here, but I'm just trying to work out in what situation it would get to Section 202 review before you've actually been evicted. That's a bit odd. I guess it. I mean,
unless they mean evicted from TA.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. Yeah, good point. Yeah, okay, no, that would make more sense. Okay, so I guess the question might be is what was the decision? Was it a non-priority decision? That sounds like maybe that's more likely. So where the council's saying you're not vulnerable, and this person say, well, their disabilities weren't even considered. So the next stage is Section 204. But although technically you could do a Section 204 appeal without a solicitor, you definitely need a solicitor at this stage. So yeah, the short answer is do whatever you can do to find a solicitor. If you search for Will Flack Law, he's got so Will's channel has basically got a section which is called like resources. Like there's a resources section and there's like list of legal aid funded solicitors or something like that. I'll see if I can dig it out whilst we're talking, because yeah, and all you can do is basically ring around all of them and hope one of them has got capacity. Karis, did you want to kind of add anything to this on this kind of point?
Yeah, again, I would say look for a solicitor, and it depends on what the decision is. Same as what you said.
Yeah. So I mean, in one sense, the answer actually is if the council hasn't considered some of the disabilities in that decision, then it's actually going to be quite easy to challenge. But at this stage, because you're at Section 204 stage now, you need a solicitor to make that argument. And we saw. I mean, I give an example of this, which might sound like I'm just saying the same old stories again and again, which I kind of am because they're good examples. But in Bedford, one of the key cases that we had when we kind of were just kind of showing that they were ridiculous was that we had someone where he had very, very serious arthritis and PTSD, and the council officer just used a standard template. We've carefully considered your PTSD and your serious arthritis, and we've carefully concluded that you don't have a disability, and they then made a non-priority decision. But because that was so ridiculous, and we kind of outed the council publicly, because I read out that decision in the Public Housing Committee just to kind of embarrass them really, because it was ridiculous. But because I could show that they hadn't in any way meaningfully considered that person's disabilities, it was quite easy to challenge it and get it overturned. But that was at the Section 202 stage, and that was when we had a track record with the council of being right. So for a lay person who's not challenged the council before, the council will try playing games and try and shrug it off. So I think a solicitor would find it easy. Sorry, Shannon.
No. I'm just again, I feel out of my depth of this question, because I'm not done sort of Section 202 reviews and stuff. But if it was a family, would it not be worth making a fresh application in another family member's name, or just making like if the disability has gotten, so say the decision was based on priority need, if the disability has gotten worse, making a fresh application based on those new facts, and then you would still trigger then Section 188 for temporary accommodation, and then you could also complain alongside that. But
This is very true. Yeah.
would it stop the review process then? Because if it's going to court, like how does it run concurrently or?
So yeah, you raise a really good point there. So and the way I read this is that we're potentially talking about a single person, but we might not be. It doesn't change it necessarily. But yeah, so if it is a family where what the applicant has kind of not had disabilities considered, it would be possible to make a fresh homeless applications in another adult's name. So if there's like two couple that have got kids or something, then you could basically add that if the husband was told they were non-pro. I mean, it's a bit of a silly example because let's say they're a couple without kids. Let's say that situation. It'd be possible for the other spouse or the other kind of partner to make an application in their name. But what would probably be more easy in this situation is because the council hasn't considered the disabilities, and that kind of seems to be kind of fairly obvious. You don't actually have to kind of ask permission. You can just trigger a fresh application anyway. So let's just get the code of guidance out because it's always a good thing to have up on the screen, isn't
And
it?
if they were particularly difficult as well, you could trigger, like say the council was really awful, you could trigger a fresh application with another, like with the neighbouring local authority, because they would just refer you back to that one, but assumingly after they've accepted the trigger of a homeless application and trigger for a temporary accommodation. So either
Yeah.
way, you would then be in temporary, because I'm just thinking if you've got disabilities, you don't want to be, without temporary accommodation, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Again, you're absolutely right. Again, the easiest way to do this is to basically get a solicitor because again, that's another option they could take. I think it's 18.9. No, 18.11. So this kind of just makes the point about making a fresh application. So if the council said, you're not in priority need, but actually you can show that they haven't taken all the information into account, or as Shannon says, the disability's got worse now, so actually there's new information. 18.11 says there's no period of disqualification if someone wants to make a fresh application, where a person whose application has previously been considered and determined under Part 7. So so that Section 184 decision that you're initially challenging, that would be considered a determination. So the housing authority will need to decide whether any new facts which render it different from the earlier application. So it's legally it's quite straightforward. My concern would be is that a council that's being that perverse probably is going to be a dick about this as well. So you're better off having a solicitor. Karis, you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, and you can request accommodation pending appeal, pending a review of the decision.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it might even be more straightforward, even if you have got solicitors to actually just trigger a fresh application anyway. What's going on my screen here?
In that fresh application, just really highlight that you've got a disability under the Equality Act, you're protected, the public sector equality duty, all of that, and crucially, don't just list the disabilities you have, but say how they affect you throughout the process and how they'll affect your housing. Because then that way they have to they have to do it anyway, but they'll probably have to consider how they communicate with you, what properties they're looking at, what temporary accommodation they're looking at. They have to consider it in every aspect of the process. But saying that right from the beginning is just going to smooth things out for the rest of it.
Cool.
Or should.
Yeah. So hopefully there's some helpful stuff in there. But again, I put the link to Will Flack's list of solicitors in there. Virgo for solicitors might be worth a shout at the moment potentially, but just give them a try. So hold on a sec. Where are we up to? Right. So this might be there's a part 1 and a part 3, but I can't see a part 2. So
part 2 is in the part 1 message.
Ah, cool. Well, hold on, that's the wrong screen. What have we just done? I'm tired. Right, hold on. Let me get the right screen up. There we go. So yeah, right. There's 3 parts to this then. Okay, so let me get the third part in there whilst we're there. So thanks for laying it out in parts. That's actually really helpful. So what if the council is dodging sending a decision letter for homeless application after requesting 3 times? Does relief duty only kick in after being placed in emergency accommodation? Do you offer personal guidance for people going through the homeless process? So all good questions. Let's just tackle them one after another. So the council, I can answer 1 and 2 probably together. So when you make a homeless application and it's possible that you might be homeless. So rather than being threatened with homelessness, as in you are about to become homeless, when you're actually already homeless and you make a homeless application, the council's first real job is to work out if the duty to provide emergency accommodation kicks in, and that is triggered if there is reason to believe that you might be homeless, might be eligible, might be in priority need. That is a low threshold. Very quickly, it's in their interest to then work out whether you actually are homeless and you actually are eligible for assistance, which loosely means having recourse to public funds. So at the moment they are then satisfied that you are homeless and are eligible, that's when the relief duty starts. So it doesn't actually start the moment you make a homeless application. It starts, well, maybe it could be hours, it could be minutes later, but it's unlikely to be more than a couple of days. And that lasts for 56 days. And so the council should make a final decision on day 57. That's what the guidance says. Let's bring it up because I've got the code of guidance up before. It's worth just kind of going back to source, because if you want to really kind of take a council on, you need to get familiar with the Homelessness Code of Guidance, and that's what I'm referring to here. So it's basically the council's rule book, and although it does say guidance, it's as good as legally binding, really. If they don't follow it, then they're immediately kind of looking at compensation claims. So bear with me a sec. I've lost my train of thought. What was the actual bit I'm looking for? So yeah, day 57. Okay, so yeah, right. If you basically search in this code of guidance, you just search day 57, you get paragraph 14.17, which basically says, if we read the bit here, so where the housing authority has information it requires to make a decision as to whether the applicant is in priority need and became homeless unintentionally, it should be possible to notify the applicant on or around day 57. So there's a little bit of leeway. And then it says, in cases where significant further investigations are required, it is recommended that housing authorities aim to complete their inquiries and notify the applicant of their decision within a maximum of 15 working days after the 56 days have passed. So 15 working days is basically 3 weeks. 56 days is basically 8 weeks. So if the council's not made a decision after 11 weeks, I'd be complaining to the chief executive council and basically getting them to, pick them up the bum, really. So that gives us a little bit of a framework to answer the question in a bit more detail. So yeah, so basically, if you're repeatedly requesting the council to issue a decision and you're still within the relief period, then they ain't going to do anything. And in fact, they can't do anything. They can't accept that main duty within that relief period. But if that 56 days or that 11 weeks, absolute outside has elapsed, then you should just basically really robustly pursue it because they have a legal job to do and they're not doing it. So the question, number 2, there does the relief duty only kick in after being placed. So it's not only, so the relief duty applies to everyone who is homeless and eligible. So you don't, so priority need is not relevant. You don't have to be in priority need to be owed the relief duty. So it doesn't only kick in after being placed in emergency accommodation, although if you might be in priority need, it will do. And then 3, do you offer personal guidance for people going through homelessness process? And so no, I will take on cases occasionally in certain situations. I work as a painter and decorator because I have, there's not a lot of money in all this sort of helping people to get housed. To be honest, you have to pay your mortgage and stuff. So, but as I say, check out the list of solicitors on Will's site. And the best I can do is basically say that the videos on the YouTube channel are certainly attempting to be informative. So there might be some stuff that might help you out. Certainly, it is possible to kind of get situations sorted out on your own. But if you can get a solicitor, then it's obviously going to be much more straightforward. It shouldn't be on people to get council to follow the law. So, Shannon or Cash, want to add anything to question 6?
I would say if you're making the complaint, like keep your records of what you're saying when you've asked. Try to do everything in writing. I know we probably say it all the time, but try and do everything in writing so you've got a record of what's been said and what you asked.
Yeah, I'd actually go further than that. Say don't try, just make sure everything's in writing, because I would never ring up a council ever for any reason. I'd always do it in an email because you've then got proof of when you sent it. Yeah, cool. So right, let's see what this one here. Can you ever see the process of homelessness and dealing with homeless people being more just and considered being more just as in justice?
Yeah, is in more fair, I think.
Yeah, okay, no, great question. So all I can say is I absolutely know for sure that members of the public can get a council to follow the law. Um, in Bedford, I won't bore you with my life history, but in Bedford, a few of us, a handful of us, for some of it, just two of us, me and a guy called John Allen, we set up a little charity that kind of challenged the council. We have got the council to now publicly acknowledge that they don't gatekeep, or they try not to gatekeep, because of those complaints and the compensation we've got people. So it took 10 years to get the public admission that happened, but we got really good results immediately, and kind of got some really systemic issues kind of sorted out within a few years. So it can be done. It's absolutely possible to be done. Charities largely completely fail to discharge their moral duties to prioritize the needs of their clients over the funding needs. So one of the my biggest barrier to kind of in my mind to kind of this being all more justice, that charities essentially are specifically obscuring and kind of doing the council's dirty work for them a lot of the time. There are some charities which are exceptions, yeah, absolutely, but the overall kind of the overarching effect of the homelessness sector is to obscure the legal duties, make it harder to be housed, not challenge the system, and a lot of charities get a lot of money from housing benefit and universal credit and whatever. So that's my answer to it. It's a great question, but yeah, so it can be, but ultimately I'd say it's a responsibility on every single member of the public who is not homeless. What are you doing about homelessness? Why have you not been to the council to challenge them if they're breaking the law? Because they probably are. And it shouldn't be down to homeless people to try and figure that out and to kind of challenge them. It's very difficult to. But yeah, certainly. But so a few stats just to kind of illustrate what I'm saying. So since we started doing what we did, the number of single people in temporary accommodation has gone up by 5,000%. So it was 10, now it's 500. The national increase is 300%. So there's a threefold increase. We've times it by 50. No, sorry, 50. Bedford Borough Council has committed to paying or buying something like 25 or 24 million pounds worth of temporary accommodation on the back of what we're saying, and that includes kind of wheelchair accessible temporary accommodation, that sort of thing. They have employed something like 20 or 25 more staff on the back of complaints and FOIs and questions we asked in the public. So there's a whole range of things that can be done. It just shouldn't be done by homeless people. They've got enough to worry about, to be honest. It should be done by members of the public, and it should definitely be done by charity chief execs. That's my little soapbox thing anyway. But yeah, Shannon or Karis, you want to add anything to that one?
I think I agree with everything you've just said. I think for me as well, like, it shouldn't be dealt with by homeless people who are going through it. But as you're probably aware, I'm also a big fan of co-production and lived experience. And I sway from being really positive about the changes that are happening, and particularly central government. I've been quite impressed with the work that MHCLG are doing to embed sort of lived experience in like policy stuff. But I've been really impressed with that, but I struggle to see it trickling down yet. And I see a lot of charities in the homelessness sector who say they do, lived experience involvement or co-production, and actually they're not doing it safely. And that seems like a silly word to use, but they're doing it, at their own benefit still. And that's not what co-production's about. Co-production's about the benefit for everyone, not just for the organization. So for me, I think that's the answer, because as I'm sure most people watching this, if you've gone through homelessness, you're the expert in what you've gone through. And often, we can sit here and talk about the code of guidance, and we often do, and we talk about policy and we talk about law, but that's not what's happening on the ground. So the sector and the systems are never going to change unless they're listening to the people who aren't being, employed by those systems, by those sort of sectors, and listening to those experts by experience. But I think that needs to be done safely. I think it needs to be, and again, I think central government does a good job. I think some local authorities are doing quite good. I think Westminster have got, like a whole board, a panel of lived experience that are doing their strategies and their policies, and it's really weird because we talk about the great things Bedford's done. They have not done co-production. I personally would say they've done, the odd survey and stuff, but they've not done it wholeheartedly. And I'm rambling. But yeah, central, and on that point though, so central government currently have, if anyone's been in supported accommodation, they've opened up applications for their supported housing advisory panel. And specifically, they're hiring people who have lived experience of being in supported accommodation. So if you're interested in that opportunity, and again, full like disclosure, I work for Expert Link, but we're also, in the process of recruiting people for our national influencing forum. So yeah, but it's not on people who are currently going through it because it's too much, Anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. Just so Shannon, are you able to put a link to that recruitment kind of link? So
Yeah.
when we talk, and I'm assuming because I know that you guys before you pay people for their time. It's not like you're just expecting people to come and show up. Yeah. So Shannon, if you could put a link into the chat, just kind of keep an eye on that, guys, because yeah, if you can get through this process, all I'd say is don't forget that kind of experience you had. I know a lot of people, quite frankly, have been overwhelmed by it and need to forget of it, to be honest. But if you kind of have any more fight left in you at the end of it, do check out Expert Link and kind of the sort of work. And Shannon was just using a bit of jargon there. So I just MHCLG is like the Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government. So it's kind of like the government department which deals or oversees homelessness. And co-production is the idea that services should and work best when they are delivered by a genuine equal partnership between people using the services and who have used the service and the so-called expert professionals who often don't know the first fucking thing about it, to be honest. It's embarrassing. In my kind of career, I've been in rooms where people with lived experience have specifically been excluded, and the professionals are kind of like, we're the experts, we're the ones who know what's best, and it's disgusting anyway. But again, I'm soapboxing a bit there. Karis, did you want to add anything to that one at all?
Sorry. No, I would agree with what you say, but I also think there needs to be accountability on the councils and the local authorities that deal with homeless people, and a trauma informed process. The understanding that there's a lot of trauma that people go through from being homeless and going through this process. They need to take a more supportive approach before they even think of the legal process. They need to find out, from a whole well-rounded approach than just go, oh, this is what we need to do. We need to tick these boxes from down the list and then go on about their day and their job. If you've got people ticking boxes and it's a ticking box exercise, it's never going to improve. The whole thing needs to be rewritten. You need counsellors, you need mental health experts to work with individuals that are most vulnerable. It needs to be addressed from a whole range of angles and not just let's tick this box and oh no. The whole system needs scrapping, and until that happens, I don't really see it changing.
Yeah.
And the protection
that
for
was really
people as
negative.
well. No, but the protection for people as well who are going against the grain, that, is why so many people are scared to sort of stand up and say anything, isn't it? Because, well, you're going to lose your job. And again, that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, although I'd say to any professional who kind of that's their excuse, I don't think a lot of it, to be honest. They have agency, but yeah. Anyway, let's stay on track, guys. Really good question. So yeah, and I think there's one more technical question from the. Oh no, there's a few more. Okay, hold on. So let's get this one done. So yeah, sorry. In fact, someone's just asking for a waiting time for a one-bed flat in Tamworth. I can tell you that it is 81 days from the point of the main housing duty being accepted. So this relates to a question we talked about before in terms of, is someone homeless if they have a relationship breakdown but there's no domestic abuse, or there might not be domestic abuse. So the 81-day period is an average which only responds to people who have been found to be homeless, eligible in priority needs, not intentionally homeless, and local connections taken care of. So there are the reason I haven't really published these stats properly yet is because I need to do a proper video explaining what the caveats are. Otherwise, it's meaningless. But certainly Tamworth, certainly as far as I can tell from the numbers, it is a good council to be going to. Far better than. I mean, I think the longest waiting time I've seen for a one bed so far is like, was it Waltham Forest? Kingston on Thames is 2,000 days. So that's like 6 years. yeah, oh, yeah, Croydon, 5,000, 5,500 days. I don't know what that is in years. It's a lot. 15 years. I don't know. Some do some maths for me. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, yeah. Give me 2 weeks, and I should have put that video out with the waiting times. So, I just saw Hillingdon mentioned, which is not good news because Hillingdon ain't great. So, what if someone is with Hillingdon Council with child who receives DLA for behaviours and that link towards them of fleeing DA is still unlikely to get social housing, or can they request to go outside London? Okay, so good, another good question.
Did you want to share the question? You don't have to. I'm just.
Oh,
You're not sharing currently. It's just us currently, which is fine. I'm just.
What? Okay, hold on. I don't even know what I've done wrong there. Then my screen's telling me I'm sharing. Let me just try it again.
I don't think you are. Maybe it's me. Now you're sharing.
Okay, yeah, cool. Sorry if that was weird. So yeah, 8 here. So yeah, what if someone is with Hillingdon Council with child who receives DLA, is fleeing domestic abuse? It's right. Okay, so let's just unpick this. So okay, and I apologise if I'm being patronising here. So fleeing domestic abuse, the wording is quite important just to kind of put into a legal context within homelessness, because you don't have to flee your property to be homeless because of domestic abuse. If you're in your home, but the risk of domestic abuse is going to continue if you remain there, then you're already legally homeless and you're therefore automatically in priority need. Now, in that situation, you can approach any council in the country, and that council cannot refer you back to Hillingdon or wherever if there is a risk of domestic abuse in that area, in that district. And if they tried to refer you back, Hillingdon, in this case, Hillingdon Council just simply refuse it and say no. So this person absolutely could apply to any council in the country. And let me just share. Right, I'm going to share my Excel sheet here. This is one of the reasons why I've done this exercise, because this is exactly the sort of situation where I think it could be quite helpful. Because for people who are homeless because of domestic abuse, they can go anywhere. And let's look at Hillingdon. So it sounds like we've got a 2-bed need. So Hillingdon Council for a 2-bed is actually only saying 253 days average wait. Now, there are, again, these caveats still kind of kick in here. But let's say you just literally didn't care where you were going to apply to. You could go down Liverpool. You could go 55-day average wait. So the yellow column is the 2-bed properties, I should say. But if we go kind of scroll down the list here, I don't know if there's one short amount. As I say, I think Basset Law is probably the shortest one I've seen so far, which is technically like 6 days. So yeah, Basset Law for a 2-bed, technically 6 days.
Wokingham was 36.
Say again.
Wokingham was 36.
Yeah. So and Wokingham was like Surrey, 19. So that's not far from Hillingdon. My geography is not brilliant. So you can Dacorum, which is just north of London. So that's really interesting. There are some caveats I want to add to all these figures. But because Dacorum is like, I think St Albans and like just around there, which is not far out from London at all. Cheltenham Borough Council 34 days. So I might as well, since I'm on it, I'll show you a map of it as well, because this is what I love doing. Proper geek. Let me just wait for the map to open. So yes, let's go back to the question as well briefly whilst I'm faffing around with stuff. So now let's go back to the question briefly. In fact, let me just get I've just opened Photoshop now. It's crashing my system.
I wonder with their question, because there was a thing saying after that question with no local connection, it kind of to me then sounds like they've maybe already approached Hillingdon with their domestic abuse application, and maybe Hillingdon saying, well, you've got no local connection, which is maybe why they're struggling to get the social housing element side of things, if their policy is like, well, yeah, because local connection doesn't matter for the homelessness application, but if they've got an allocations policy that says actually you don't get social housing if you're outside of the area regardless, that wouldn't contradict the domestic abuse law, would it?
Yeah,
I don't know what
I'm not. No, let me just recap. So I'm not going to open that map because it's just crap. That's why you just sound like a robot, Shannon. But it was my system, not yours. it's fine. We still understand you. Just kind of sounding like you're on Mars or something. But so yeah, let's just go back to the actual question. So what if someone is with Hillingdon Council? So that says to me that they are potentially a council tenant, or because again, it varies from council to council. So because let's assume that we're talking about here, someone is a council tenant in Hillingdon who has a child with a disability and is fleeing domestic abuse. Is it still unlikely to get so? You can, yeah, all I can say is you can apply to Hillingdon Council and have a sensible conversation with the housing officer and say, look, what's the chances, and hope that the housing officer's kind of decent and honest and tells you what the reality is. And because they might say, you can approach Hillingdon, Hillingdon would have a responsibility to ensure that any accommodation they then offered was safe. So they need to look at a risk assessment of, where's the perpetrator and all that sort of stuff. Are they likely to follow this person? And I've said it before as well. It's not just about risk from the perpetrator; it's also about risk of being socially isolated. So, imagine sticking a mum with a child with some significant disabilities 200 miles away where they know no one. I would imagine that not being part of the community 200 miles away is also going to be a big risk factor for both the mum and the child. So they can, I don't overcomplicate the answer. They absolutely still can apply to any council in the country in this situation, and assuming that there is a risk in Hillingdon, then they would not be referred back there. And I guess all I can say is that they therefore need to take in, one of the things I'd say you want to take into account is the kind of waiting times that you're actually dealing with, because Hillingdon's actually, as a London council, is not bad at all, actually. I would have guessed what they're actually doing there is they're just housing everyone in private rented before you can get to social housing, so it's not even showing up in the figures. But yeah, so yeah, I feel like I've just overcomplicated things. I might return to that question in a bit when I've just had a bit more thought about it. But I think, yeah, the kind of the child's disability in terms of autism and stuff, I don't think is really going to change much about the duties that Hillingdon Council have under the Housing Act, as in homelessness law. But there might be additional, obviously, considerations for the family, and potentially children's services might be involved, and schooling might also be an issue. So there's some other complications that might come into play there. Oh yeah, so and just there's a little kind of just a few more words there, just to kind of So I think this is what Shannon was talking about. So yeah, you don't have to request to go outside London. You just can approach any council straight up. And Hillingdon Council again, actually, if they're on the ball and they're a decent housing officer, they'll tell you how to do that as best as possible. Where's Will Flack? He's I don't know what he's doing tonight. He's doing something better. I don't know, with his better mates or something. But he's going to be back at some point. So yeah. And as far as I know, he's going to be doing a stream on Monday night on his channel. So I don't think I missed any here. How are we doing for time? I will overrun it. So Shannon and Karis, if you need to go, obviously feel free to. So we're overrun. I didn't even notice the time there. So number 9, what does local connection mean? Does getting care, Kevin,
Instigated.
So, okay, as in like
care, so getting like from the council,
like social care, yeah. So okay, interesting. So I'm not quite sure in what situation that might arise in, because generally speaking, your social care kind of applies to you wherever you stand. So you don't need a local connection to a council to get adult social care. But then that kind of works against you as well. So if you approach Bedford Borough Council and you're getting social care from Bedford Borough Council, and then they move you to Milton Keynes Council, Bedford might well still have the housing duty to you, but Milton Keynes Council would have the duty under your adult social care would get transferred to the other council. So for that reason, you're not going to get local connection through the care you're receiving, unless it is very, very unusual for some reason that you can't get anywhere else, but that's unlikely. In terms of the kind of broader question about what local connection means, Google, just search on this channel for what does local connection mean. I can't remember the name. I've done several videos about local connection. Just have a look at those videos just to get, because it's quite straightforward in one sense, but I've done a better job on the channel than I can do right now on tonight's show. So yeah, again, sorry if that's a bit of a cop out, but there's some genuinely useful videos on the channel just to go and look at. So have just search for local connection, you'll find a number of them, to be honest. But yeah, I can't see a situation where adult social care or receiving adult social care is going to make a difference to local connection. But it's possible to have multiple local connections, by the way. Not that that changes my answer, but next question: if you're staying at a charity, how long will they keep you, and who do council push for prime rented? Yeah, so okay, this kind of gets back to what if this person was listening about half an hour ago, I was whinging about this a bit. So charities, they take you in, they say, yeah, this is brilliant, we'll give you all the support. What they don't tell you is that there is no move on policy and that you won't get social housing. Now, not all charities are like that. So a lot of supported accommodation will have a specific criteria within the housing allocation scheme, which is the kind of the policy for allocating social housing, where if you live there for 6 months or something, you'll get band B or band 2 or whatever. But not all supported accommodation does that. A lot of the unregistered supported accommodation, which is generally the worst, doesn't have any of that at all. I saw a charity on LinkedIn this week saying how great it was that someone had lived in supported accommodation for 5 years, had just suddenly moved on, and it was like 5 years. You're saying that's a good outcome. This is someone who had low support needs when they moved in. But 5 years is like that. That was seen as a good thing for the council, for the charity. So what you need to do is Google your council's name and the phrase housing allocation scheme, which will give you the local council's policy about giving out social housing. And within that policy, and it could be quite a long policy, there you can search for the term supported accommodation or similar terms like supported housing or whatever. And you might find some criteria there about a particular pathway that you can get social housing through that process. But it seems to be becoming increasingly rare where supported accommodation actually has that kind of arrangement with the council. Shannon?
I'm just going to encourage the person as well to ask. I know that sounds like really whatever, but if you are not intentionally homeless and you are eligible, you should. I can't really think of a situation if you're eligible and not intentionally homeless where you'd be forced and whether you should be forced in supported accommodation. So you can take your time and say, all right, I am considering supported accommodation for whatever reason, and that's fair. And go and visit the supported accommodation providers, get an email where you've, emailed them saying, perfect, I'm really interested, but what's your move on policy? How long can I live here? How long do I have to move out for? And all of that, and get it in writing, because then you've got some accountability. So if you do move into the supported housing provider, you can say, well, no, this is what I was told on X date, and it's not changed, or you've not told me it's changed. So there is that bit of accountability for you to complain later down the line. But yeah, what I would encourage you to do is take time and ask questions and try and speak to residents that live there. And that's going to be difficult, but I would recommend if you can try and do that, because you're going to get the honest sort of feedback from them there. And again, I know this is such like, it feels weird giving this advice, but a lot of local areas have local Facebook pages and groups, and often you can ask a question anonymously in these groups. So you could ask anonymously. So we've got like We Are Bedford. So if it was me, I'd put in a question on We Are Bedford and say, right, I'm homeless, I'm looking at supported accommodation providers. Has anyone lived in King's Arms project? And can they tell me what they actually think? And if you want to message me privately, feel free. And you might just get a bit more of an honest, localized feedback, if that makes any sense.
Makes loads of sense. I'm particularly negative about this one because sometimes often you ask staff from the supported accommodation what the policy is, and they don't necessarily deliberately lie to you. They just don't know what it is, because that is not interesting to them at all, because they have no interest in actually moving you on. That's just my opinion. And
or they don't have one.
Yeah, or they don't have a policy at all. Yeah, I'm just basing that on a few personal experiences where they essentially were misled and accepted accommodation, which really stuffed them up, and really didn't do them any good at all. Right, we're going to just kind of fly through some of these questions. I'm not going to say as quick as possible. We're going to try and do in reason, but I'll try and stay a bit more focused now. So, can the council throw a person out on the street in December? Yes, they can. If they find that you're not in priority need or that you're not eligible for assistance, as in you don't have recourse to public funds, then yes, they can. To cease to, they can't throw you onto the street, but they can cease to provide accommodation themselves, which will have the same effect. There will be things like the severe weather emergency provision, the sweat provision. So most areas have some kind of provision for particularly cold nights, but that is ropey. That is going to be like a camp bed in a big room, and not a good place to be. But yeah, in one sense, the council does not have a duty to house everyone. If you're not in priority need, or you are in priority needs and your intention home is and you've been housed for 3 months already, so the council still has a duty to you, but after 3 or so months, they will then end that duty. Then yeah, it can happen, and yes, that inevitably results in people becoming very, very unwell, losing limbs to frostbite and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, that's how the law's been made. So, Karis?
They do have the severe weather emergency protocol. So when a local authority can act when the temperature gets too low, and the impact of snow and ice on homeless, which, like you said, should be in a big bunker.
Yeah, it used to be pretty uniform, as in it used to be that it would be triggered if there are 3 consecutive nights where it's sub-zero. These days, it seems to be a bit broader than that. So in Bedford, I think they're just opening up for the next 3 months or something, 4 months. So it's open every night.
Yeah.
So potentially, depending on your situation, the cold and just general rough sleeping can make certain medical conditions worse. So if it's a priority need issue, for example, you could always make a fresh application based on that if it was priority need. So.
And they should have winter provision toolkits so you get washing and change out of wet clothes.
Yeah. So there's a question actually I missed there. So sorry. Yeah. So what if they approach? So what if someone approached Hounslow was told to go back to Hillingdon? So if it was just a verbal, piss off back to Hillingdon, then that will be gatekeeping. Hounslow would have to accept an application and refer you formally back to Hillingdon if the local connection, if that's what the right thing was anyway. So what and again, there's loads of local ombudsman cases where that's exactly what happens. You've got a homeless person in London or anywhere, in fact, and they go to one council and the council simply says, "Oh, you don't have local connection here, or you're not in priority, go back to somewhere else." That's not lawful. If you have the headspace for it, you can complain about that, but it's a lot of work, and you potentially won't get you won't get much money at all if it's just a single failure like that. Again, if Hillingdon had competent officers in there, and I'm not saying they don't, I don't know them, they would talk you through them. So, because it might be that if domestic abuse is happening, then actually Hounslow might be a good place to go to. The point is, the Hillingdon council officer will suddenly know what the law is when it involves helping you to go somewhere else. So they can talk you through that. I've seen where was it? One of the South London councils, and then they kind of helping someone kind of actually giving them telling them what to write to go to a different council when it was actually in the interest for the person to do so. So, and the reason I say Hillingdon's not great, is because they've got this 10-year residency requirement. I think that is the most strict in the whole country, as far as I know. But that doesn't apply if you're homeless. If you're fleeing domestic abuse, then you're homeless. The 10-year residency requirement does not apply because you're going down the homeless route. Even if domestic abuse wasn't involved, you only have to have lived there for 6 out of the last 12 months in settled accommodation, as well as some other criteria as well, which I go through in the videos on local connection on the channel. And then a question here, which I don't know the answer to, actually. It was a good question. So are there any links to support accommodation, please, that are suitable for those with physical disabilities? Not that I know of. There's not, because they're kind of charities and because they're a little bit, off grid sometimes. I don't think there is like a centralized database. I think Homeless Link, if you Google Homeless Link, they do have like a directory of lots of different homeless charities, but it won't be all of them. And I think you just basically have to ring up the individual charities that you might want to apply to, and they might tell you whether they got accessible accommodation or not. Karis?
Yeah, but if you've got physical disabilities, you'd be in priority need, you'd be classed as vulnerable, so you shouldn't be looking at supported accommodation. You'd be looking at the working with the council, local authority.
Yeah.
Completely agree, unless because there's also supported accommodation for like disabled supported accommodation, not homelessness supported accommodation. So if that's what they mean, and they're on about disability supported accommodation, that's a whole different
Yeah.
area, if that makes sense. Like I just suddenly clocked, I was like, oh, if it's physical disabilities, it might be like almost sheltered sort of supported accommodation
Supported
rather
living,
than
yeah.
With
yeah,
assistance.
supported living. Yeah.
Then again, talk to your local authority. That would be
Yeah, and social services would probably be a great bet there, wouldn't they?
yeah.
So next question is a really meaty one that came through the week, which is why it's not anonymized, and I've left it till almost last. We can talk a little bit about this, but the answer is get a solicitor. So I have 2 kids and I was in temporary accommodation. The council put me in private rented sector, which the agent worked for the council. Now the building where I live will get demolished. My caseworker doesn't help at all. How can I push the council to rehouse me somewhere suitable? They want me to move 75 to 80 minutes away from the borough where I live now. My son has GCSEs next summer. I'm disabled. My 10-year-old son has DLA because of his health problems. So it is definitely challengeable. So a solicitor would probably have quite an easy time challenging a 75-minute placement. There's this, I think, it's kind of a bit of a myth, really, that the only thing that counts is whether your kid is in GCSE. Yeah, there are other considerations around school age, particularly when there's a disabled child involved as well. So it can be challenged. I mean, basically, let's again, let's go back to the code of guidance briefly because it does mention GCSEs, which I think is where people get this from. But as I say, it's not the only situation where the council would have to have to kind of take it into account. So 17.55, when securing accommodation for families with children, housing authorities should be mindful of their duties under Section 11 of the Children Act 2004 to discharge their functions with regard to the need to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. This would include minimising disruption to the education of children and our people, particularly, but not solely, at critical points in time, such as leading up to taking GCSE examinations. So a solicitor would actually probably have quite a lot of fun kind of looking at Section 11 of the Children Act and the point that council should be promoting well-being. And effectively, the council would have to demonstrate in their notes and their records how they carefully considered the well-being of those 2 children and how this 80-minute away offer of accommodation is suitable. They probably won't be able to do that, which is why a solicitor would essentially win the argument. But very difficult to do that as a layperson. So yeah, so hopefully that's kind of an over kind of arching answer, but get a solicitor. Yeah, use that link I put into the chat about Will Flack's page and have a look down there. Particularly maybe start with just giving Virgos a ring just to see if they've got capacity. So, and then this is the final question for the night. There's more questions coming in the chat. Where are we? So. And I just lost. Where's YouTube gone? There's a couple of good questions coming in the chat as well. Let's just do this one. So 15. I've got a Section 21 notice at the. I don't know what that means. Going through process with council housing. Have been told to look for private properties are not high on priority. Letting agencies will not accommodate because I don't earn 30,000 a year. Do you have any advice on this? So, I guess so. I did a video about this a couple of days ago. This word priority crops up in lots of different settings and means very different things depending where you are in the process. So if you've got a Section 21 notice, you can make a homeless application if it's within 56 days of expiring, because you're then threatened with homelessness, you're about to become homeless. So you can make an application. The council have to discharge what's called the prevention duty, which they should give you some useful advice and stuff like that. It should be actually kind of give you a realistic prospect of finding somewhere. And then once the Section 21 expires, unless a couple of criteria kind of kick in, which they often won't, you should then be treated as being legally homeless. And what probably matters more than anything at that point is whether you're in priority need, which is not the same thing as being high on the priority list. So priority need is a very specific thing. Things like being pregnant, having dependent children, having significant mental health issues, and so on would be priority needs. But the council would have to make that judgment. And so there are a number of things the council can do, and one of which is to basically link you up with a private rented sector landlord and discharge their duty that way. In the prevention duty rather than the relief duty, you can in effect not cooperate, and there's not really any consequences. But cooperate if you can. Other than that, I don't have a lot of advice. Really, what more than anything, what you need to work out is, are you in priority need? So check out the video on the channel. We have several videos about priority needs. If you're not in priority need, the council's not really motivated to help. They might do. They might be a good council. They might be a good housing officer. They might help still. But unless you're in priority need, they don't need to. They don't have to put a roof over your head. And so that means that you've got far less leverage than you would do if you are in priority needs. So that'd be what I'd be focusing on, is work out, do you meet any of those priority need criteria? And then final question for the night, which is a good question. No, I've just copied the same one again. Hold on, let me actually get the right one. What is the process like after getting help from a solicitor? So, I mean, after you've got, yeah, don't sound like a dick. After you've got help from a solicitor, hopefully everything's going to be sorted, or your legal issue is going to be sorted. In terms of the process of actually getting a solicitor and kind of how that works, Karis may well have a lot more to say about this than I do, but essentially, there'll be some forms you need to fill in initially to show that you satisfy the legal aid and the legal help requirements for the solicitor to actually get paid for it, which is kind of providing bank statements, giving fairly straightforward details, personal details, and so on. Once the legal aid stuff has been sorted out, the solicitor can actually start really helping you. And they'll want to identify what the issue is. It might be that the council, let's say, is finding you're not in priority need, but you actually are. So they'll kind of diagnose the problem, and then they will basically start writing to the legal department of the council, threatening them with legal action if they don't actually do the right thing, which in most cases will result in the council doing the right thing because they realise that they're in the wrong. But yeah, obviously sometimes the council will hold their ground, and the solicitor will have to kind of go down the legal route of going to court and so on. Karis, do you want to kind of add anything to this one? From your point of view as being a solicitor?
Just gonna say they do explain the situation to you and the law and what you're entitled to, so what the outcome will be. So they'll give you options. Well, not really options, but they'll go through what your options are and take instructions on what you want. Applying the law to your case.
Cool. I just realized, was I sharing the wrong screen again? Sorry if I was there. Let's get the right one up. So, no, that's not what's going on. Shannon, which screen can you see right now?
You were sharing the questions. Now you're sharing the code of guidance. Now you're not sharing at all.
Oh, hold on. Let me try that one more time. Is that you can see because on YouTube it's showing as like question 5.
Question 16. I can see now.
Okay, cool. Okay. Right. I don't know what's going on with me this end, but anyway, that I think is all the questions for the night, guys. So, having worked in the homelessness sector for a long time and then seeing how a solicitor works, I can tell you, getting a solicitor is going to be your best bet. It'll be relatively smooth from that point in. So it's probably worth persevering, ringing all the numbers and trying to get through to someone and seeing what's going on. So we're gonna call it a night, guys. In fact, it's now 9 o'clock. So for the person who just asked that last question, if you put that question into the comment section of the YouTube, any video on the YouTube channel, I'll pick it up next week if I don't respond to you initially in writing. So I'm afraid we're out of time, guys. But yeah, thanks very much for all the good questions tonight. We'll see you next week, Thursday, in this channel. I think this Monday on Will's channel. Shannon and Karis, thanks very much for your time tonight again. And hopefully this stuff has been useful. And as I kind of always finish this awkward bit up, do keep going, do keep persevering, try and get solicitor. The law is pretty good. It's just councils don't follow it. So you need to get someone on your side just to make sure, kind of sit on councils till they do follow it. But yeah, take it easy, guys. Hopefully this has been useful, and